Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Susan Chapman, Director of Member Services for the Tri-Societies. With me is Ann Jorce, Chief Operating Officer of ASTA and representing ASTA's lead and FUSE committees. This series is a collaboration between ASA, CSSA, SSSA, and ASTA. We're pleased to have you join us for our 2019 webinar series titled Road Trip of Your Career. This series, using a road trip metaphor, addresses some of the biggest forks in the road that we all face throughout the journey of our careers. This webinar, Switching Gears, Transitioning to Administration, focuses on how you can prepare so you're ready with the skills, knowledge, and abilities for this new career opportunity and challenge. There's just a few notes before we begin. You're welcome to ask questions via the question box on the lower right of your screen. To keep the flow of the webinar, we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. And then after the webinar, you'll receive a feedback survey. Please take a few minutes to give us your thoughts. And now I'll turn it over to Jonathan Shaver of Envision Partners, who will be our moderator. Jonathan?
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone to the next stop on the road trip of your career. My name is Jonathan Shaver from Envision Partners, a leadership development company focused on the growth and advancement of leaders in agriculture. I'm also an associate member of the American Seed Trade Association and a member of the Leadership, Education, and Development Committee. The American Seed Trade Association works on behalf of the seed industry to promote the research, development, and movement of quality seed to meet the world's demand for food, feed, fiber, and fuel. I'm so very glad that you found the time to be part of our webinar today. Today we have two outstanding speakers, Drs. Maria Gallo and Dr. Klaus Kohler. Dr. Maria Gallo, a Fulbright Scholar and a Fellow of the American Society of Agronomy and the Crop Science Society of America, became the 13th President of Delaware Valley University in July of 2016. Under Dr. Gallo's leadership, Delaware Valley obtained its first endowed professorship, expanded graduate programs, and developed a comprehensive 5-year strategic plan focused on making Delaware Valley the leader in experiential education. Before joining Delaware Valley, Dr. Gallo served as Dean and Director for Research and Cooperative Extension at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. Prior to University of Hawaii, Dr. Gallo was Professor and Chair of Agronomy Department at the University of Florida. She's a plant molecular biologist and has been the author on 82 scientific articles and 9 book chapters. Dr. Gallo earned her BS in agronomy from Cornell University and both her MS in crop science and PhD in genetics from North Carolina State University. She currently serves on the American Council of Education's Women's Network Executive Council and the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities of the Pennsylvania Board of Directors and the Pearl S. Buck International Board, which I recommend you check out. Dr. Klaus Kohler began his professional career at KWS in Germany. In 1988, he moved to the United States to establish a proprietary corn breeding program as Director of Research for KWS Seeds. In 1999, he became the global corn breeding leader in Aventis Crop Science, directing the breeding programs worldwide, as well as the transgenic trait development facility in Champaign, Illinois. Then in 2006, Dr. Kohler joined Dow AgroSciences as North American Northern Corn Breeding Lead and became the global temperate corn breeding leader in 2009. In this role, he developed the corn breeding strategy for North America and for Europe. Since 2014, he became the North American breeding leader, responsible for breeding activities of corn, soybeans, cotton, and sunflower. And most recently, Dr. Kohler has been named the North American Operations and Logistics Lead for corn breeding at Dow DuPont. Dr. Kohler served in several honorary roles. He was a consultant for the Siegel Family Foundation for corn breeding in Egypt and India. He served for several years in the North American Plant Breeders Association, recently as their president. And he is on the scientific advisory team of a project at the Gates Foundation in Africa. And with that introduction, Dr. Gallo, I'd now like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to begin by telling the listeners a little bit about Delaware Valley University, or DelVal. We're a small private 4-year institution located in southeastern Pennsylvania in Doylestown, which just was selected by USA Today voters as the best small town cultural scene in the country, which is very, very cool. We're located in Bucks County, about 50 minutes north of Philadelphia. What's distinctive about Del Val is that it began 123 years ago as an agricultural school, much like the larger public land-grant institutions. Today, we remain very strong in agricultural sciences. In fact, we were recently ranked 19th in the country for our animal science program. We have about 2,300 undergraduate and graduate students and offer 25 undergraduate majors, 7 masters, and a doctoral program. We also are known for experiential learning, and we were recently selected by the National Society for Experiential Education for their 2019 Outstanding Experiential Education Program Award. So I'm very proud of Del Val, its faculty, and its students. But what I want to make clear to everyone listening is that never in my wildest dreams did I ever think I would be a president of a university. And I'm closing in on 3 years as Del Val's first woman president, and as you said, its 13th president overall. I wanted to be a scientist since I was 8 years old, and that was my focus. So how did I end up as a top administrator, and what did I learn along the way? So let's take a look at my educational and career path. When I was 8, I wrote down all the colleges I dreamed of attending in order to become a scientist. Growing up in New York, I gravitated towards the Ivy League schools. I had a cork board above my desk at home, and I pinned that list of schools on it, and I stared at that list every day. So 10 years later, I was thrilled that I got an early decision to Cornell. I was initially interested in environmental sciences, particularly soils. And as I progressed, I became more interested in food crops and graduated with a BS in agronomy. Since I wanted to do high-level research, I knew that I had to get a graduate degree, so I attended graduate school at North Carolina State University and received a master's in crop science and then later a PhD in genetics. What I learned from both undergraduate and graduate school were skills that are handy as I moved on in my career: resiliency, tenacity, perseverance, and how to be a better critical thinker as well as a creative independent thinker. I also learned the value of teamwork and collaboration. Well, after graduate school, I moved to Texas, and I did a postdoc at Texas A&M at their experiment station in Weslaco, Texas. There I worked on transforming sugarcane and became the first to genetically engineer sugarcane with something other than a reporter gene. We created herbicide-resistant sugarcane. This position gave me an opportunity to discuss my research internationally, so it gave me a better understanding of global perspectives. And there was another critical thing that happened to me when I was doing my postdoc. I met a sugarcane scientist in Weslaco who worked for the USDA, and she challenged me to gain leadership experience. I was a member of ASA and CSSA, but she told me that I needed to go to the business meetings for my division and volunteer to be on committees. I distinctly remember being naive and saying, what would they want with me? Not knowing, of course, how desperate we all are for free labor. I mean, volunteers, all joking aside. So that's what I did. I volunteered to run the graduate student competition at the next annual Tri-Societies meeting. And the rest really is history. I became very involved with CSSA, rising up through the various offices until I became president of CSSA in 2011. So I would urge everyone listening to become involved with your scientific professional societies. I learned so much about management, leadership, networking, and advocacy through CSSA. I had experience via the Tri-Societies that were unique from academia, and so that enhanced my skill set. And it gave me advantages when vying for administrative positions in the future. Okay, so from my postdoc at A&M, I became an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota, and I worked on barley and wheat for several years. And here, of course, I ran my own laboratory and became more skilled at managing people and budgets. Then, the University of Florida came calling and an opportunity to work again on sugarcane. I spent 16 years in the agronomy department there, rising through the faculty ranks, becoming an assistant, associate, and full professor. During this time, and this piece is important to note, and we'll come back to it in a minute, is I participated at that time while I was at Florida in formal leadership development programs. Two examples that I want to mention are LEAD IFAS, which was a University of Florida specific program, and the National LEAD 21 program. These were invaluable programs, and I have a few slides coming up later that will show you the value of such programs to advance one's career, especially if you're interested in administration. Well, it was here at UF that I made the gradual switch into administration. I had zero ambition to be an administrator, to be honest. I had my dream job. I was a research scientist at a major top public university. I was getting grants, I was publishing, I was teaching. I loved it. But what happened? What happened was that the chair of my department, after serving for, I believe, 17 years in that role, decided to step back into the faculty, and literally no one wanted the interim chair position. I always joke that like those comedy movies where someone asks you, would you please step forward if you want something, and everybody else in the line steps back and the clueless person is standing in the front. That's how I felt, there I was. I didn't really want this position, but I seemed to be the only one who could take it on at that time. So I took on that role, and to my surprise, I absolutely loved it. I enjoyed working with the faculty in my department and the other department chairs and directors. And in this role, I learned how to manage large budgets. And that really is a key if you want to go into administrative positions, I think, is to have that kind of experience managing budgets, not just your own personal budgets if you're in a lab or running a research program, but these larger scale budgets. I was able to get experience evaluating personnel at various ranks in the institution, dealing with delicate personnel issues, learned how to set a vision for an academic unit, to set goals and establish priorities. In other words, I was able to be strategic at an organizational level, and I found that very rewarding. So as I said, I was at UF for 16 years, and then someone nominated me for the position of Dean and Director of Research and Extension at the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, at UH Manoa. And there I managed more people. It was more complex. There were larger budgets. There were multiple sites across the state to manage. And so I had more responsibilities. But they were particularly interesting and new, especially the areas in which I was able to engage with the governor and state legislators. So I learned there that it was important to listen. It was important to build consensus. After spending 4 years at the University of Hawaii, I saw the position of president open up at Del Val, and I knew I would be a great fit. Its ag history, its reputation, its location, and the core values, which I'm going to touch upon again later, they all resonated with me, and I knew that my experience would be what they wanted and what they needed. So I took the leap and became president. But next, I want to highlight why I think taking formal leadership development programs like Lead 21 are so valuable. These programs help you understand yourself better, like how you think, how you work best, what you value, and how that all aligns with stakeholder expectations, wants, and needs. This allows you to seek administrative positions that are best fits for you and also for the organization. First, I want to distinguish between management and leadership, and you see this on the slide that I have up now. Management is getting things done. It's dealing with complexity. But leadership is providing strategy and vision, and that results in dealing with the needed change that has to happen within an organization. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to use myself as an example of how all this comes together and how taking these formal leadership development programs along with the hands-on learning that you do in your own position leads to a smoother transition into administration. So by going to these various leadership development programs and engaging with the various tools they provide, one can formally learn what your individual styles are. So this is not made up. This is not me just guessing what my leadership style is. There are actually tools that you use to determine these things. And I found these to be extremely, extremely important. So let's take a look at this slide. You'll see there's 4 circles. And for me, my tendency is to have a supportive style, and a supportive style means what? It means that you don't simply delegate, but you support employees until the task is done. It's more of a mentorship kind of style. There's also a directive style, and you see that in the lower right-hand corner, and that's where you make decisions and set the direction, and then you delegate those responsibilities. So you're making those decisions. It's a quicker way of making decisions. And on the top, you see promotive, and that sometimes that's called an advocate or cheerleader kind of leadership style. And at that time, what you do is you pick your employees up, you pat them on the back, you help them when they need help, and you're very, very cheerleader-like in getting them to move on different things that they need to get done. And in the bottom circle, you see analytical on the left, and that really is when you analyze your data, you break down a problem, you work on creating action steps and a plan, and that needs a lot of time and a lot of data to get that done. So that takes a little bit more time in the decision-making process. What I want to say is that we will employ all of these kinds of styles anytime at a given when a given problem is presented to us. What this is saying, though, your dominant style for me is a supportive style. And it's important, I think, for you to know what that style is, what you gravitate towards, but understanding that you need to be adaptive and you need these other kinds of leadership styles when the situation prompts it. The other thing I learned is, what is my change style? And this is extremely important to understand too, how you approach change. In this diagram, we see that there are three types of change styles. The first one on the left is what's called the conserver. And the conserver looks at a structure, whatever the structure is in your organization, and accepts it. Things are working well, not going to change the structure. Any kind of change that a conserver would do is incremental change, so small improvements over time. The middle section talks about a pragmatist, and a pragmatist likes to explore the structure, doesn't take for granted that it's working, always looks to see if it can be better or more effective or more efficient, and that's why a pragmatist will look for functional changes to take place. On the right is an originator, and that's more of a transformational kind of change leader. You don't want to change things for change's sake, but an originator is a more big picture thinker who likes to change structures and likes more expansive kind of change. So what am I? So through these leadership development programs, I learned that I am a pragmatist, so in the middle, but I have originator tendencies. So I do look for change, I do look for transformation, but if it isn't broken, I don't try to fix it. And I think this is important because your change style, how it meshes with other people, when you're looking for administrative type positions, you want to see that you're a good fit with the organization overall, or if you're more one way or another in terms of your change style relative to the culture of the organization, how you can manage that is extremely important. So the other thing that going through leadership development programs that help you when you go into administrative roles is understanding what your core values are. And for example, I'm showing my core values here. There's 6 of them listed: integrity and trust, truth, scholarship, teamwork, and diversity. These are all important for me personally. And when you're looking to move into another organization, I think it's important to understand what their core values are and if your values and their values align. So why am I saying this? What do values have to do with leading, with being in an administrative position? Well, the values, yours and the organization's, plus the need that exists within the organization, helps you to develop a vision. And that vision plus a strategy gives rise to the needed change you're going to have to implement in order to move forward. So it's all helpful knowing your leadership style, your change style, your core values, so that you can look for the right fit for you going into an administrative position. I wanted to list DelVal's core values here because their core values resonated with me personally, and this helps you make a decision into going a certain pathway, going into a certain position to make a choice about where you want to go. And I just want to say these 6 core values resonated with my personal values. So it made that fit work very, very well. So look for that when you're looking to move into administrative positions. Overall, though, when you're thinking about what moving into these positions, I like to use the idea of start with why. This was a book written by Simon Sinek. It's a great book. I would recommend everyone read it if you haven't read it. And it really illustrates how to inspire action. And it uses the concept of the golden circle, which in the middle of that circle is why, which is really having you consider the purpose, cause, or belief or reason for your organization's existence. Why are you doing this? What is really the purpose, the drive for this organization? Then on the outside of that why, you have the how. And this is the things that make your organization distinctive and unique, right? It's how you deliver on that why. And then the last piece is the what, which are the products and the services that you actually make, employ, etc. So starting with why is extremely important. And for me, my why was having students reach their fullest potential so that they could lead their best lives and serve the community. So I'm going to be looking, obviously, then when I go into administration, as I did, for educational institutions. That's my why. That's what drives me. So values and need lead to creating a vision and putting all that together. Here in my new position, the Del Val community created our new vision, building on our legacy. And that is that we'll be the leader in experiential education, empowering all learners to transform the world. So everything fit in nicely with my position, where the university wanted to go, and the university community, so that we could develop a vision and now can start implementing these. And why I've been saying all of this and to try to put this all together is because it's important that I leave you with this. So everything I said is all well and good, but no matter what you tackle, what milestones you set for yourself, you have to plan for the entire journey. So this is a picture of Mount Everest, and I didn't know this until I read it several years ago, that 70% of the deaths climbing it are not reaching the summit, but are coming down. So it's critical for success that you truly understand what your ultimate goal is and plan accordingly. So planning is so important. So as we're saying, transitioning into an administrative role, it shouldn't be just getting that administrative role, but how are you thriving in that administrative role? How successful are you when you get there? And what are all the steps that lead up to that? Well, that's all I had to share today with you, and I'm thrilled that I had the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gallo. Those are wonderful comments. And now we'll also hear a perspective from Dr. Kohler as he begins his presentation. Dr. Kohler, I see we have your screen.
Can you, yeah, you can see
yes.
it? Okay, good. Very good.
Thank you very much.
So, okay, well, thank you very much for coming in today into our session and listening to, I guess, our story. So I will gladly take care of the second part of this webinar. I work for Corteva AgriScience, and I'm the logistics lead there, basically, which is a role where currently I'm responsible for the implementation of new strategies in corn breeding in North America. I also lead a team of late-stage testing, so the testing that's close to commercialization in North America for several crops. And I also lead the silage breeding right now in Corteva. Corteva is a company that is founded basically on the heritage of three companies, Dow, especially Dow AgroSciences, because it's about agriculture, DuPont agriculture, and of course the well-known seed company Pioneer that has a lot of tradition. Corteva AgriScience currently does not exist yet as an entity perspective, and it will become basically a company officially on the stock exchange on June 1st, which is going to happen very shortly, and will then be the only major agri-science company that's completely dedicated to agriculture only, actually, in this world. So Jonathan already introduced kind of me and the different things that I did, so I just wanted to show you this sort of pictorial of my career, and I think emphasize a few things. One would be that, when you look at this, of course, you see a lot of movements to different places. And I would say most, if not all, of the movements were actually possible because of relationships. So essentially, to get to my PhD at the University of Hohenheim, there was a professor in Berlin where I was an undergrad that offered me to do a PhD with him in animal breeding, but I said I wanted to do plant breeding. So he basically then connected me with somebody that he knew very well at the University of Hohenheim in plant breeding. When I finished off my PhD, there was the brother of the key breeder for KWS in Germany finishing his PhD. And so he knew me really well, so that's how I got an interview with KWS. So really, I think one point that I wanted to make here is that connections, networking, almost any of these jobs, Agrivo, Dow, I'll talk about that a little bit later on, MTI, all those for me became possible because of people that I knew, that kind of opened doors for me. The other thing I wanted to point out too is that, of course, it looks like I moved around a lot to different companies, but in fact, the only time I really left the company on my own terms was at KWS. All the other changes happened because of the industry, because of changes, because of mergers and acquisitions, financial situations that occurred that made the change necessary or maybe better for me. So I think that's the other part of looking at a career in industry. I think that you may end up making more changes than you think, but I think especially if you have a fairly narrow expertise, which I have as a plant breeder, you often, if you want to have a career and really make steps in your career, you will need to be willing to have that ability to essentially work in different environments. So early in my career, of course, as a plant breeder, it was all about technical expertise, about learning the trade, learning, the different crop in my case, and the germplasm, how to be a breeder, but also fairly early on, as soon as I moved to the U.S., 2 years after I was hired, it was about, learning how to manage a budget and hiring people. And as we started opening more and more stations in the U.S. Between essentially 92 and 99, there were more hirings, and there were experiences around human resource issues. So it was kind of already a foundation to understand, to go beyond the science and really get into learning about administration at that point. When I became a breeding manager, then that sort of became more pronounced. So I moved away from the breeding station and moved to the headquarters of a company in Michigan, and there I was now got a lot more involved with the other parts of the company. So learning about product targets. Also, I think an important step was to let go of my breeding program. Somebody else was handling my breeding program now, and if you ever met a plant breeder, you know how protective they are about the lines that they develop and how they how emotionally connected they are to them. So letting go of that was another important step. But then it was a lot about networking with the commercial, with the commercial colleagues, the production department, finance, and really also what I really learned when I was up there in Michigan those 7 years, still with KWS at the time. How does the seed business actually work? So you see the whole business itself. What does it need? A seed business only sells one time a year, really, so that you have to finance things in between, and understanding those kind of important factors of a successful seed business is something I learned in those 7 years. Interacting with the shareholders, which were, in this case, was KWS, so it was easy. But you learned what their issues are and what they need to see from a company. Of course, refining budget experience and managing performance, but also starting to think about personal goals as far as what do you really want to achieve in your career, and is this what I should be doing going forward? And there were thoughts about, well, should I leave? I had an offer to go back to Germany, to KWS at that time, that was very attractive. And I decided not to do that. So that all started me thinking, what should be the next step? And at that time, I had a mentor. It was somebody who had been hired first as a consultant for KWS and then became a major consultant for the company Agrivo, which was the agriculture division of Höchst Corporation at the time. And so by knowing him and him knowing me for over years, actually, he approached me about joining Agrivo, and so eventually I made the move and I started working at Agrivo through this connection. Then within Agrivo, it was being a scientific manager, so I was learning about technologies, about transgenic technologies, which I really hadn't dealt with before at KWS. Understand contractual language, regulatory issues, legal issues, FTO issues that exist, of course, in germplasm, but in a more complex fashion. Once you enter the technology space, it becomes even more complex. Working in a larger multinational company where the larger the company gets, I would say the decisions are not always obvious, and understanding how they're made and who makes them becomes important to understand why things are happening. Managing in different geographies, I had a global responsibility. I was dealing with people from India, people from Brazil, Southeast Asia, Europe, US. So it was quite interesting, but also a learning experience that you cannot communicate the same way with people that have different traditions on how they communicate. And of course, because Agrivo became Aventis and became Bayer within 4 years, it was really about understanding how to manage and tolerate the change that was occurring, how to stay productive and keep a positive attitude. And what I learned, I would say there, was that in these kind of cases, you really only can influence what you're doing, your own actions. And I think the most important thing in those situations is to stay very focused, to keep doing very good jobs, and really do the best jobs you can, and ultimately that will help you to control these situations and have the best possible outcome. And then finally, of course, the company MTI, which I worked in for 2 years after I basically left, which was then Bayer Crop Science, after the merger and then the acquisition by Bayer. And Bayer essentially decided that they wanted to sell their corn assets. We all know they have changed their mind in the meantime and made a big investment more recently. But at the time, they were thinking about divesting their corn. And so I was corn. So I could have stayed in Germany. I could have moved to Germany and done corporate strategy. but I decided I wanted to stay in breeding, so I had a clear goal at that point, what I wanted to do going forward, stay in breeding, and so I joined this company, which was a startup that a couple of people that had worked in Agrivo and Aventis to start this little company. But then working in a startup, again, it's a very small company. You have venture funding. Breeding is very long term. Venture capitalists normally have a very short time horizon. It was also not easy. There was a lot of financial instability. There really wasn't a coherent culture in that company, and but what I learned there, for example, is that communication is extremely important, and so we spend a lot more time, even though it's a small company, to make sure they communicate correctly with everybody, and also to reach outside for knowledge. That there wasn't a lot of expertise in the company, so a lot of things you had to get through outside contacts. Then finally, through somebody that I knew the breeding leader at Dow at the time. I had met him when I came to the U.S. in the beginning, so I knew him on a personal basis, and so that's eventually I asked him, and he said, "Yeah, this is a good time to join Dow because that's when Dow started investing in seeds," and so I started working with Dow. I would say some of the things I'm mentioning here now in the next slides or two would also apply to joining any new company. If you're a new employee, whether you have experience or not, I think these all apply the same way. Especially if it's a larger company like Dow was, is a very big chemical company. You have to learn their system in a way. There are certain things in larger companies that you just cannot change. How they do their expense reports or how they do their budget reports, and there are just certain things that you cannot really that you just have to adapt to. And in the beginning, I would have to say I was really thinking very hard in Dow whether I should stay there or not, because it felt initially very restrictive. Especially I just come from a startup which has no structure at all. So I was really having deep thoughts about whether I should stay in this company or not. As you know, I stayed, and in hindsight, I would say that was a very good decision for my career. As you will see later on, or as I can just tell you that it was very good to kind of wait it out and give it a chance, understand, how you operate, and then how can you develop a career in this environment that you're in. What did I learn at Dow, or in these years? There were lots of projects that people were working on in Dow. Normally in companies, I would say in general, larger companies, that's very, very normal. So, and what you learn when you manage a project is really to lead a team without formal authority, because the teams don't follow any kind of reporting structure, and so you're learning how to influence people and how to work with people to really get them to listen to you, and also get them to respond to whatever needs to be done. And because in the end, as a project and as a project lead, you have to deliver results. Another thing that was very developed in Dow, but happens in other companies as well, is that you had to balance multiple responsibilities. I was a site lead, I was a regional breeding lead, I had a big project in dihaploids that I had to get first to start from the ground up, basically, dihaploid inbred line development in corn. So there were lots of things to balance at the same time. And so what I learned in general, I would say here, was that think about how your abilities and the experience that you bring and the education that you bring can really help the company go forward, and find your niche that helps you be effective and bring something unique that is also part of the solution that brings the company forward. I think the other part about having a career is to say, okay, well, this is nice, but is there another step that I can do? What kind of steps are there to advance in the company? So, I had that conversation with my supervisor at a certain time in Dow, and he mentioned to me the fact that, well, there is a career path for the fellow. At that time, I had very few reports. I was more on a scientific kind of path when I was the temperate corn breeding lead in Dow. Basically, you were also managing strictly by influence, and a fellow was a good step that I could take, but I had to also fulfill certain requirements and become more active externally, for example, and also show that I was able to manage at a certain level within the company and have a sphere of influence within the company. Another thing that I learned in Dow, and I think that I did a lot in Dow, was to engage in different areas. Dow is a company that spends a lot of time on people management. So they had this program Lead to Exceed, which was a management development, essentially, that was primarily without external experts, but mostly driven by employees. So you could volunteer to do the program, and then you might be chosen to become a coach. So I became a coach there. I did that several times. It's a week-long commitment that you make, almost not 24 hours, no, but it's really a very intensive week. But doing things that go beyond the things you normally do, you learn a lot. I learned a lot about interacting with people, and I learned a lot about, got a lot more connected to my colleagues and so on. And finally, I think it's important to be tenacious. It's important to have goals. It's important to create results, but then also, I think sometimes you just have the patience because it may not come, the result or the advancement or whatever goal you have may not realize right away, and you have to give it a little time for it to occur, and oftenly then it does. So, finally in 2014, I became an admin leader of a group of about 300 people. In North America, all the field people essentially reported to me directly. It was multi-crop, included winter nursery sites. So it was around saying goodbye to science, but also I realized very quickly that I was able to choose to still be involved in some R&D projects, and that's what I did. The key skill set, in this kind of pure admin role that it was really to manage and develop your listening skills, learn how to manage your time. So understand what are your priorities, and pretty strictly follow those. So choose what meeting you go to, choose what you work on, because otherwise you might be consumed and never really accomplish very much. So being very selective on what you work on was critical. I also learned how to work with HR. That was where lots of people issues and people processes in Dow. So that was critical. Overall, never get too comfortable. Stay proactive. Try to be ahead of the game and really plan as best you can for whatever outcome you want. Deal with pressures, budget pressures. There are disciplinary actions that you have to deal with. And really in those, I think the best thing is to stay true to yourself and respect confidentiality to retain your own credibility and always really deliver what you promise. I think that to me at least was a very important part. So, moving forward, what would I recommend to anyone who wants to have a career? I would say develop yourself. Read, learn what interests you, talk to your boss about development, engage your supervisors, how could they help you, seek out learning opportunities, either scientific, present at a meeting, if you're a scientist, volunteer. I engaged in an APB, as it was said. I was on graduate committees, several grad committees at Purdue. I was in the Dow Hunger Network. Educate, if that's something you like, which I do, training, be a facilitator, and really build a network, obviously. I think that's very clear. I mentioned that already before. and also think about how do you perform the best? So which is the way that you can be most comfortable and can do the best possible job and stay out of the whirlwind, as they say. So when you get emotionally too entangled into what's happening, slow down and then take a step back, actually. Never think you have arrived. Most important of all is to have a clear focus and a vision on what you want to accomplish, to have very clear goals for yourself, as well as for, the group that you're leading or whatever your responsibilities are. That's very critical. Know what you want to accomplish by when. Even if you miss it, you will get a lot closer if you have goals and a clear understanding of where you want to go and when you want to arrive. Stay curious, keep exploring new things that excite you, and above all, I would say, don't play it safe. Do things that present themselves to you that may be scary. You may think that, oh, this is something that's going to be scary, but if you actually go through them and experience them, you will have some amazing experiences. With that, I think I'm done with what I wanted to share, and thank you for your attention.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Kohler, for your comments that followed and complemented Dr. Gallo so very well here today. So as I've been writing out to our listeners, now is the time that we take questions. All right. And if you'll just start typing them in to the question box, if you haven't done so already. All right, and I've been collecting them, and they've been piling in throughout the presentation, showing that our listeners are very, very engaged. Okay. So I'm going to start with some questions that I took off that will, I think, apply to both. So we'll hear some comments from both of you, Dr. Gallo and Dr. Kohler. And so this one's a good broad question. So the question is it okay to set out a goal to become an administrator? And this is in the context that it seems that each of you took the opportunities as they presented themselves, but it wasn't your original intention. So is it okay to set out a goal to be in this kind of role?
That's an interesting question, Jonathan. This is Maria.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine it is a fine goal to have. It wasn't the goal that I had. And I think that if that's your goal, you really have to gather all those other experiences. And to me, I'm thinking about it, to answer it in a way that makes the most sense. But I think it's okay to have that as a goal. But I think what you really need to do is just develop yourself as an expert and a well-rounded person overall, so that it leads to that kind of a position. I mean, that's at least my take on it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
so
I would.
Go ahead, please.
No, I would agree. With that, it's definitely okay. I think, yes, you have to prepare yourself and understand in what environment you would be an administrator. Normally, that means that you end up dealing with people issues, or you're dealing with lots of people. That's mostly what it is. And so then it's really gaining those experiences that help you get to a good level of expertise in how you manage people, and but then also understanding really what environment are you going to be in. Do you need something else as an expertise that will be helpful? Example, being a hospital administrator, you may need to know something about health and be a nurse or have that kind of background, or a physician or whatever.
Okay. So you're both recommending that there's a requirement to have some experience in the field in which you are administering. And so those steps that you've described, maybe they wouldn't be as long, but they're still necessary. And the path might be more direct if that's your goal.
Yep, I think so. I think at some levels, once you get to a much higher level, then it doesn't matter, I think, what organization you're running. You understand the concepts of what it means to lead. And I think then you're fine. You know, you learn what the particular business is. So the what is not so much important at that point. But the why, I think, is always important. I think in order to be successful, you have to really buy into the why of that organization, that you're passionate about it, that it aligns with what you're thinking, and then you'll be the best at leading that organization if you truly believe in it.
Right. So that's what makes for a great administrator, is somebody who believes, and that's at the core.
I think so.
Of doing any job. Great. So sort of toward that end that the opportunities came to you, each of you talked about your scientific passion. So Dr. Gallo, you talked about that you had an 8-year-old dream of doing that, 8-year-old's dream to be a scientist. And Dr. Kohler, you talked about giving up the breeding program and that aspect. Talk a little bit about the emotional transition of doing that, of not being that scientist anymore. Dr. Kohler, you want to try that?
Yeah, sure. I can. So for me, I think the solution was twofold. One was to actually look at the new role, which was, in my case, had no official science context, and think about what are the elements of this role that I find really interesting. And for me, it was the human resource aspect of the role. That I mean, the role essentially had a budget aspect, safety. It had, you know, certain of course, you know, it had people disciplinary issues were there, and but then it had a people development, a big people development element, and that to me was the one that I really put a lot of emphasis on. It was important in Dow. They spent a lot of time on it, and I could sort of gravitate to that. The other thing I also did is I still continued to be engaged in science projects, so I didn't completely disengage, actually.
Yeah, same for me. I just recently I'm a co-author on a paper that's going out to hopefully be published. So I've always kept my hand sort of involved, but of course it's not directly doing the bench work that it used to be. But I feel that in an institution where I am now, developing programs, STEM programs, having scientific judging competitions that I'm involved with, teaching a little bit, engaged with helping students do undergraduate research. I think all of that helps feed that part of me that still so much loves science directly. And it's hard. I think that transition is hard. I have to admit that it was harder for me than I thought it would be. So that's an excellent question, that you have to look to see what other passions you have, other things that'll fulfill you in this administrative role, and how you can, you know, satisfy that desire that you have to still engage with science.
I think it's good for our listeners to hear, and everyone here to hear, that it's not easy, and that if you have those kinds of difficulties in that, thinking about that transition, it's legitimate.
Very
not
much
necessarily
so.
a reason to not do it. And tying back to the why, you have the same why. It's just a different way to achieve that why.
Correct.
Right. A very early question came on, and it came from the biography that said it seems that every change in the career meant a physical move. And is that something we should expect, or is there another way to do that?
I would say it's very much dependent on the field you're in. As I said, if you are a plant breeder like I am, that is they're not, the job opportunities are, you know, still fairly broad when you're at the breeder level, but if you make a career out of it, then the locations where you could be located become more and more limited. And so in my case, yes, it was mostly related to a move. And I think the best chance to not have to move is if you're already at the headquarters. Then maybe the probability is a little lower that you have to move for the next step.
And for me, my first administrative role was at the University of Florida, and I spent 16 years there. I could have remained there and probably stayed in the chair role or moved into another administrative role possibly. But when opportunities present themselves, you know, they can be anywhere, and I was open to that at certain points in my life, that a move was a good thing and opened up my horizons, and I didn't want to pass up those opportunities. But certainly is something to think about, and everybody is in a different situation in terms of their ability to be able to move.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's a, yeah, that these choices are more than just the work choices. It's your life and your lifestyle and what's always possible for you. So quite a few questions, individuals asking for recommendations. If you have any recommendations for a formal leadership program, perhaps one that's in a university or one that would be publicly available if you're not currently at a university.
I think I mentioned the Lead 21 opportunity. I think if you're at a public land grant institution, you have to be sponsored by, I believe, an administrator within the land grant. But I thought that was an excellent, excellent program. I would recommend that to anybody who's in a land grant system to be endorsed and supported by your administrator to go to that program.
Okay, so that's Lead 21.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Any thoughts, Dr. Kohler? Anything that you're aware of that's out there in the...
Yeah, so I mean, I know there's a program about leadership development at Washington State University, but otherwise, I don't really know too many universities who have. I mean, this is something I've been interacting a lot with Purdue when I was in Indianapolis, and right now I'm making a connection to Iowa State. So and speaking to the folks that I know from NAPB, I think there's still, when you look about graduate, especially graduate education, there don't seem to be a lot of opportunities yet for grad students to really engage into like something like a leadership development or something like that while they're doing their graduate programs. So there's still, I think, something that I know universities want to develop it, but it's still something I think that's in development as far as I know.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Gallo, do you have something else to add there?
Yes, I don't know if it's still going on, but I would assume it is at the University of Wisconsin. There was a program called the Journey of Facilitation and Collaboration, and that was really well run, and that took many different kinds of people in. So there were academics who were in administration already, there were graduate students, there were people from the community that participated in it, and that was extremely valuable at one as well. So that was in Madison at their main campus.
Okay. And I would recommend looking at the professional societies. I know that the Tri-Societies has such programs, and I know that the ASTA also has leadership development programs.
Yes, Jonathan, thank you for saying that. I wanted to say I took several of those over the years and found them extremely valuable. And in fact, a couple of the slides that I used came from work that I engaged in with the workshops that the Tri-Societies put on.
And one of our listeners wrote in, it's lead-21.org if you'd like to take a look at Lead 21.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as we close up here, we're right down to the last couple of minutes, and I guess, you know, as people are looking forward to their career, they're asking, is it an either or choice to be a scientist or be an administrator? Is it possible to move back and forth? Is it possible to try it out? From being a scientist, try some administration to move back. What have been your experiences in your different kinds of organizations?
I think it depends on how long you're out and what exactly you're doing when you're out. I think it's difficult to move back into, if you've been gone a long time, into primary research again. But I think that you can still engage in science again after being an administrator. But there's a lot that depends on the particular circumstance. But I think overall it's probably quite difficult.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say it depends a little bit from a private sector perspective. It depends a little bit on the company culture, I would say. So I would say there are some companies like Corteva, for example, where probably there a lot of scientists have an administrative element. There's less separation between, if you will, science and having some reports, having some budget responsibility while still being a lead scientist or a principal investigator or something like that. So it depends a little bit. It doesn't have to be separate, and depending on the organization, there can be lots of opportunities to do it, to do lots of science and a little administration, or a little science and more administration. So if you choose, if that's what you're interested in.
I agree.
Very good. Thank you so very much, Dr. Gallo and Dr. Kohler. And Dr. Kohler, if you'll advance to our last slide for us today.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you both for reflecting on your personal experiences and your career journey, because it really gives us the opportunity to learn from your experience. And I'm sure there's something we can all identify with as we heard your stories. And these key learnings will truly help us all. So the participants, we want to thank you for your interest and your very active participation today in this webinar. I apologize we couldn't get to all the questions. Our next webinar is in the ASTA Tri-Societies Career Development Series is titled, Are We There Yet? Planning for Retirement. And that will be held on June 26th at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. So until then, I thank you all for joining us today. I thank our speakers, and we look forward to being with you next week or next month. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Thank you.